This film has been made by RMT's Education Department to assist RMT members, and especially our new union representatives, who are the sinews of our industrial organisation. This film is about helping you understand aspects of the RMT history. If you don't understand where you come from, it makes it difficult to understand where you're going. This film is not intended as the complete, definitive history of our union, which continues to be made by RMT members.
And this event tonight is to raise awareness of Paul Robeson, especially his role as an activist. As I mentioned, many people know him as a singer and an actor, and possibly as a lawyer or maybe as an American football player. Having such an event is to raise awareness, one, and also to get people back, to basics, learning about our history. History is important every day of our lives. I'm from Ghana. We have a word called sankofa, sankofa. Go back and learn from the past, right? Because lessons have come and lessons have gone. So I believe history is truly important to learn lessons from our forefathers in the union, in the world in general, and also in the trade union movement. We learn things from different countries.
If you forget your history, it's like a river that forgets the source. And when a river forgets its source, it means that the river will dry up. And without us knowing about our history, we do not exist. We cannot move forward, and we cannot progress.
When we are representing members in the workplace, especially those who are being discriminated, it helps when you are actually mentoring or encouraging them to carry on, to tell them about the history of the other workers who've gone through the same.
Quite often I have employers, politicians and other visitors to this building coming to see us to talk about the issues affecting our members. And one of the things I like to do is take them into our boardroom, something I'm very proud of, because it reflects our history and our democracy. And in that boardroom is a big oak oval table built by rail workers, for rail workers and transport workers to sit round. Every decision affecting our members since 1910 has been made around that table. I show them the pictures of every president of our union dating back to 1871 on the wall. And in the same boardroom is a bookcase with bound copies of executive committee minutes dating back to 1910, recording the decisions made by our union in defending our members and representing our members. I then turn round to them and say, we were here before you came, and we'll be here when you're gone. It's our longevity that matters.
We've fought a million battles to defend our hard-won rights. We're going to have to fight again and ask you here tonight, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
On May Day each year, working people all over the world celebrate the victories won by organised labour. And we remember the comrades who we've lost.
May Day. It's a day to remember those people that have struggled to give us the conditions and freedoms we've got now, and also to continue struggling to keep what we've got and improve life for everyone in general.
Originally, the 1st of May was chosen as the International Workers' Day in order to commemorate the so-called Haymarket Massacre. On the 4th of May 1886 in Chicago, police opened fire, killing several workers on a strike meeting calling for the 8-hour working day. In 1890, the Socialist International called for international demonstrations to be held on the anniversary of the Chicago Massacre, and May Day became an annual event.
On the 1st of May 2014, London's May Day Organising Committee, together with RMT, held a huge May Day march from Clerkenwell Green to Trafalgar Square, paying tribute to the lives and work of two great socialists, RMT's General Secretary Bob Crow and Labour politician Tony Benn. The march's message that day was, "Don't mourn, organise." the motto pioneered by American Union organiser Joe Hill when he was framed for murder and executed in Utah in 1915.
The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe. I didn't die, says Joe. I didn't die.
The National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, the RMT, is known internationally and throughout Britain as a trade union that fights for its members and negotiates some of the very best paying conditions for workers across the transport industries. While RMT is rightly seen as playing a leading political and industrial role in today's trade union movement, our union also has a special and unique history.
What makes RMT so unique? The many different trade unions and workers' organisations that came together over a period of 150 years to form RMT played a formative role creating today's trade union movement in Britain.
And the trade unionists who marched on May Day 2014 in honour of Bob Crow and Tony Benn recognised that fact.
RMT's forerunners in the Amalgamated Society of Railway Servants and the National Seamen's and Firemen's Union were the very first trade unionists to challenge the unfettered absolute power of the gigantic shipping combines and railway companies, the largest corporations of the 19th century.
Them ship owners who was the worst employers you can meet, worse than the mill owners, worse than the mine owners. They was just villains, scoundrels.
Our predecessors organised some of the earliest industrial workers in Britain. RMT's forerunners in 1899 were the first to propose to the Trade Union Congress that trade unions in Britain should establish a political party, a party of labour, to represent workers independently from the parties of the employers and the ruling class. In 1909, RMT's forerunners were among the first trade unionists to argue that workers through their trade unions should establish a central labour college to control and develop our own education programmes to arm trade unionists with the tools we need to defend working class people.
And how many people in the RMT have had an experience of quite a high level of education, by the way, in the state system, and come out and find that whole tracks of history, whole tracks of economics and sociology have been denied them. I mean, nobody teaches how the working class organised in the 1800s. Nobody tells about the great events, the great dock strike or the general strike and all the rest of it. They make sure you understand that there's one viable system, the capitalist system, and they make sure you understand that you're a worker or an employee. You're not necessarily an organised trade unionist. And that's what we try and do here, is to fill that huge gap.
RMT's forerunners in the National Seamen's and Firemen's Union led the first general strike by transport workers in Liverpool in 1911 and inspired the first national rail strike later that same year.
RMT's forerunners founded the very first industrial trade union in Britain in 1913, the National Union of Railwomen, which organised all grades in one union under the principle, unity is strength.
The NUR was the first of a new kind of trade union in Britain, an industrial union, founded to organise any workers employed on or in connection with any railway in the United Kingdom. The industrial union organised established railway grades, such as plate layers, signalmen, drivers, firemen, guards and porters, but also carriage and engine cleaners, so-called unskilled workers alongside the skilled. Railway shopmen, engineers alongside labourers, carters, road and rail freight workers, workers in railway docks and on board ships owned by railway companies. The new industrial union welcomed telephonists and ticket office staff, chefs, waiters, railway catering and hotel staff, railway printers, and even factory workers making prosthetic limbs for railwaymen injured in accidents at work. All were rail workers. When private rail companies cut railway lines in the 1920s and substituted rural buses for train services, the Industrial Union organised the bus workers across much of Britain's rural counties.
RMT's forerunners developed the political programme that allowed the post-war Labour government to nationalise railways, canals and much of road transport from 1948 under the British Transport Commission.
RMT's forerunners in the National Union of Seamen in 1966 started the fight back against pay cuts and job discrimination that led to the great trade union upsurge of the 1970s.
The five of us was put in by a political coup, and it was the trade union movement that got us out.
And today, RMT continues to innovate and show leadership to the whole trade union movement.
In 2005, RMT was the first national trade union in Britain to establish a credit union for the trade union members and their families, 2 years before the global financial system came crashing down under the weight of unsustainable debt.
They're already calling this Black Monday, and certainly £60 billion wiped off.
This short film has been made to help you understand some of the key developments of our past in order to learn from them.
Our union's ability to deal with threats to our jobs, pay and conditions depends on our continuing ability to educate RMT members to understand our history.
Transport workers had to fight for their rights before trade unions even existed. Throughout the 18th century, seafarers protested against cripplingly low wages. As protection from Royal Navy press gangs, northeastern seafarers demanded a National Seafarers Association. Protesting brutal punishments, sailors at Spithead off Portsmouth became the first workers in Britain to fly the red flag as a symbol of political revolt. The need for a maritime union was clear. A Seamen's Loyal Standard Association was founded when Combination Acts banning unions were eventually repealed. The seafarers' first trade union appeared in 1850, with 3 more in as many decades. In the same period, workers of the new railway industry joined the battle for representation. As rail networks spread, so did workers' unrest. The first recorded railway strikers were enginemen and firemen on Britain's first passenger railway, followed by labourers on the Great Western and then the Glasgow and Ayrshire railways. The first railway strike called by a named organisation was in 1848, the year of revolutions across Europe. Within a few years of each other, porters, goods guards, shunters, clerks and pointsmen had walked out on 3 major rail networks. Labour unrest fed demands for improved labour organisation. In London, 3 specialist worker societies formed within a year. These small organisations provided high-cost insurance for members who were sick or on strike, but sticking plasters weren't enough. Workers needed a lever for change. Workers from many rail companies met at the People's Hall in Holbeck, Leeds, demanding a rail workers' union. A week later, a 200-strong meeting launched the ASRS. Days later, the society held its first mass meeting. At the behest of the Great Western Railway's general manager, a fraction split from the ASRS to form a new craft union, ASLEF. Another craft union was founded for pointsmen and signalmen. To increase wages for skilled labour, craft unions divided skilled and unskilled workers. Rejecting this craft elitism, a general railway workers' union championed new unionism for semi-skilled and unskilled workers. A prominent seafarers association, the Sunderland Union, created a new national amalgamated union for seafarers, the NSFU. For rail bosses, trade unionism for clerical workers was a particular concern, since they had access to vital commercially confidential information. Nevertheless, clerks formed their first national association by the end of the 19th century. By the early 20th century, dockers leaders founded a National Transport Workers' Federation to unite dozens of diverse transport unions. In 1911, Britain's first national rail strike brought 5 unions around a table to discuss greater unity. 3 merged to found Britain's first industrial union, the National Union of Railwaymen. The new NUR expanded further when a National Union of Railway Clerks joined their ranks. Seafarers opposed the leaders' cosy relationship with shipping bosses, formed a seamen's minority movement to revolutionise NSFU's policies, structures and leadership. Rival seafarers' unions were squeezed out by ship owners' powerful partnership with the NSFU, soon renamed as the National Union of Seamen. Many black trade union activists teamed up with the SMM to fight discrimination and racism in Britain's merchant navy, establishing a colonial seamen's association. When NUS members were jailed for strike action in 1960, union militants launched a national seamen's reform movement in 1966, leading the first national seafarers' strike since 1911. 2 decades later, when NUS members took strike action against the P&O Shipping Company, a Tory government used the new anti-union laws to freeze union bank accounts, leaving the NUS facing financial ruin. After 167 workers lost their lives in Britain's worst post-war workplace disaster, North Sea energy workers formed an offshore industry liaison committee. A financially weakened NUS agreed to merge with the NUR, 2 unions whose members had worked and fought alongside each other for 150 years, united to become the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers. OILC was the most recent union to join. Today, the RMT is Britain's largest specialist transport union.
The world's first National Union of Railway Workers was formed in Leeds on Sunday, the 26th of November 1871. The following Sunday, at the Winchester Arms in Southwark Street, the Amalgamated Society of Railway Servants was launched.
Despite its most moderate objectives, to promote a good and fair understanding between employers and employed, to prevent strikes, to secure 10 hours for a fair day's labour, nonetheless, the ASRS was a challenge to the unrestricted, absolute power of railway companies over their workers.
At its AGM in 1887, the ASRS agreed to a proposal from its Edinburgh branch to allow the Executive Committee to call strikes and support strikers financially. They would need it. Britain's world domination of export markets was coming to an end. Rival powers, Germany and the USA, were squeezing the profits of Britain's bosses.
Railway companies' reaction to falling profits was to cut jobs, wages and working conditions. In 1899, Colonel Rich, a Board of Trade railway inspector, commented on the 187 workers killed in shunting fatalities in that year alone. The problem, he said, is financial, not mechanical. When you have found the coupler you want, its adoption will be barred by the expense involved.
Railway companies opposed any interference in their business by MPs or by the government. In 1892, the Cambrian Railway gave Station Master John Hood a month's notice of dismissal after 22 years unblemished service for giving evidence to a House of Commons Select Committee of MPs about rail workers' excessive working hours. George Findlay, General Manager of London and North Western Railway, said in 1893, "You might as well have trade unionism in Her Majesty's Army as to have it in the railway service. The thing is totally incompatible."
ASRS membership doubled to over 26,000 in 1890. A new union, the General Railway Workers Union, advocating militant trade unionism, recruited 10,000 new members in railway workshops and labouring grades in under a year.
The Scottish ASRS launched a strike in January 1891 against long working hours and low pay rates on the Caledonian, North British and Glasgow and South Western railways, where train crews were forced to work shifts for up to 25 hours in length.
By 1897, ASRS membership doubled again, from 44 to 86,000. Almost half the ASRS Executive Committee were members of Scottish miner Keir Hardie's new Independent Labour Party, which called for state ownership of the railways. The ILP called on trade unions to establish an independent political party representing workers in Parliament, instead of relying on Liberal or Tory promises of reform. One ILP member, Thomas Steels of ASRS Doncaster branch, argued in the union's newspaper, the Railway Review, that organised labour must hold itself entirely aloof from both the great political parties. In October 1898, the ASRS AGM agreed the time has come when the ASRS should be directly represented in Parliament by the General Secretary, who shall be independent of either political parties.
Doncaster ASRS branch then proposed the historic motion to the Trade Union Congress written by Thomas Steels, that this Congress devised means for securing the return of an increased number of Labour members in the next Parliament. The motion was moved at the TUC's conference in Plymouth in September 1899 by ASRS South Wales organiser James Holmes, an ILP member himself and known to be one of the finest orators in the union.
Thus, ASRS brought the Labour Party into being.
We were the ones that led the political debate, formed the Labour Party that eventually formed a Labour government. And it wasn't just about industrial legislation either, it wasn't just about trade union rights. We recognised as well, actually, when our people go home from work, they want a decent roof over their heads. They want to live in a decent environment. They want an education for their kids. If a member of their family is sick, they want health treatment free at the point of need. So in addition to securing a voice in Parliament to campaign for trade union rights, we wanted a voice in Parliament and in government that secured all those other benefits for our members.
The immediate challenge for the Labour Representation Committee also came via the ASRS. The Taff Vale Railway Company and 3 others in South Wales rejected ASRS demands for better wages and shorter hours in 1899.
When the company then victimised a well-known ASRS activist, signalman Ewington of Abercannon, union members led by ASRS organiser Jimmy Holmes began strike action from the 19th of August 1900. The Taff Vale Railway General Manager, Amon Beasley, thought he could import strikebreakers supplied by a so-called National Free Labour Association. The strikers thought otherwise.
ASRS branches met incoming strikebreakers and sent them back to Cardiff, where ASRS officials put them on trains back to London.
On the steepest sections of the Taff Vale Railway, strikers covered the rails in grease every 150 yards and then uncoupled the coal wagons when the engines ground to a halt.
Finally, a settlement to the dispute was reached on the 30th of August 1900. The same day, a judge granted restraining orders against ASRS General Secretary Richard Bell and his South Wales organiser Jimmy Holmes.
The ASRS executive called for the TUC to support a legal appeal, and on the 12th of November 1900, the appeal court judge overturned the restraining order, declaring he could find nothing in the Trade Union Acts that meant a trade union was liable to be sued in its registered name.
Amon Beasley appealed to the House of Lords. 5 law lords ruled unanimously in favour of the Taff Vale Railway Company and declared the trade union could be sued for damages. The Taff Vale Company eventually accepted an ASRS cheque for £23,000. The final cost to the ASRS was £42,000, equivalent to over £4.6 million today.
When workers struck down at Taff Vale, we fought the boss's law. Yes, for all their threats we often said, you can't scare us no more. Wasn't that a time? Wasn't that a time? The time they tried to crush us down. Wasn't that a terrible time?
The Taff Vale case exposed trade unions' legal vulnerability. While striking was not technically illegal, picketing was effectively impossible, and unions could be sued for damages to bankrupt them.
When Merthyr Tydfil and Aberdare MP Keir Hardie told Tory Prime Minister Arthur Balfour to give the trade unions legal protection from being sued, he refused. The Liberal Party in opposition took a similar position.
In 1906, a general election produced a Liberal landslide, and Keir Hardie, leader of a parliamentary Labour Party of 29 MPs, brought forward a trade union disputes bill which passed easily. The 1906 Trade Union Disputes Act stated, "An action against a trade union shall not be entertained in any court." The decision by ASRS members to establish independent working class political representation had achieved its first notable victory.
Well, there's a better world that's a-comin', don't you see, see. Better world that's a-comin', don't you see. When we'll all be union and we'll all be free, there's a better world a-comin', don't you see.
The 1906 Trades Disputes Act fired the starting gun for a militant trade union revival. In March 1906, an ASRS branch at Low Moor in Bradford called for an all-grades movement, a coordinated national strike movement across all railway companies for common pay and conditions. 600 ASRS delegates representing grades from dining car conductors to wagon examiners met at the new Central Hall in Birmingham to agree a national programme. ASRS insisted, "We do not enter negotiations with any company with this programme without full recognition." On the 12th of May 1907, 150,000 workers took part in nationwide rallies to support the national programme, and 20,000 paraded with marching bands in London from Thames Embankment to Hyde Park. In October 1907, ASRS members voted 9-1 for strike action. The GRWU members voted for strike action by over 97%. However, the ASRS General Secretary, Richard Bell, agreed privately with the Liberal government to drop the demand for trade union recognition in favour of a railway conciliation scheme. It was a trap. Bell, an MP for Derby, resigned as ASRS General Secretary a year later, in December 1909, blaming the union executive for instructing him to leave the Liberals and join the Parliamentary Labour Party. Rail workers had a choice, either to accept the conciliation scheme or fight for full union recognition. Charles Watkins, a member of ASRS Toton branch, described the choice as conciliation or emancipation. In December 1906, the ASRS executive sent 4 members on a 12-month residential course at Ruskin College, the working men's college in Oxford. At Ruskin College, the ASRS students met syndicalists such as Noah Ablett of the South Wales Miners' Federation and George Sims, a member of the Social Democratic Federation. In October 1908, Ruskin students and supporters founded a plebs league and published a pamphlet, The Burning Question of Education. Members started to teach adult education classes in Marxism in South Wales. In February 1909, they launched Plebs magazine. The first Plebs League conference was held in Oxford to establish a new Central Labour College with Dennis Hurd as its principal, supported by the South Wales Miners' Federation and the ASRS, Within 2 years, the college had premises in Earl's Court in London, where it stayed until 1929. 4 students became ministers in the 1945 Labour government, and 16 were MPs. In 1910, Tom Mann, leader of the 1889 London dock strike, founded a National Transport Workers' Federation. The same month, South Wales miners in the Rhondda Valley began a 12-month strike. Numbers of days lost to strike action quadrupled in 1910, from 2.5 to 10 million a year. In January 1911, the National Sailors and Firemen's Union held mass meetings under the slogan, "War is now declared. Seamen strike hard and strike for liberty," on the 14th of June 1911. A 72-day national seamen's strike began in Southampton and spread like wildfire around British ports. Tom Mann was invited to chair the Liverpool Strike Committee. He arrived at Liverpool docks on the 14th of June as 3,000 troops occupied the city and a Royal Navy gunboat patrolled the River Mersey. On the 13th of August 1911, Bloody Sunday, a strike meeting of 80,000 people at St George's Plateau outside Liverpool Lime Street Station was attacked by a detachment of police sent from Birmingham. The Liverpool Strike Committee declared a general strike from midnight on the 14th of August. The strike drew in 66,000 transport workers of all sectors who shut down the Port of Liverpool and all its transport arteries. The Liverpool General Transport Strike in August 1911 sparked a national rail strike with 70,000 rail workers out on unofficial strike by the 15th of August. The government backed the rail bosses, offering them every available soldier in the country. On the 17th of August 1911, the unions called the first ever national rail strike in the Liberty Telegram, proclaiming, "Your liberty is at stake. All railwaymen must strike at once. The loyalty of each means liberty for all." 200,000 rail workers took strike action. Mass confrontations between strikers and strikebreakers ensued. 1,000 rail workers besieged a single working signal box at Portishead in Bristol. In Derby, troops defending the railway station fixed bayonets and charged strikers. In Long Eaton, strikers impounded the trains and 100 troops were sent to release them. Chesterfield Station burnt to the ground. In Llanelli, South Wales, when strikers blocked the main railway line, magistrates read the Riot Act. As strikers and supporters sang the Llanelli Rugby Club anthem, "Saucepan Fach, Little Saucepan," troops opened fire on the crowd, killing 2 tinplate workers. On the 18th of August, the government set up a royal commission on the railways and union leaders called the strike off. The 1911 railway strike weakened the grip of craft sectarianism and pushed the leaders of 3 railway unions, the ASRS, the General Railway Workers Union and the Union of Pointsmen and Signallers, into merger talks, leading in just 18 months to the founding of the National Union of Railwaymen. Tom Louth, the General Secretary of GRWU, proposed the name of the new organisation to be the National Union of Railway Workers, pointing out that his union recruited women as members. However, the name National Union of Railway Men was agreed, but ASRS President Albert Bellamy gave assurances that women would be full members of this new union. Following ballots of members of all 3 unions, a special fusion congress took place at Holborn Hall in Gray's Inn Road, London. From February the 10th, 1913, Charles Watkins attended the fusion congress and helped to ensure the victory for industrial unionism. ASRS delegates voted 45 to 11 to take into membership any workers employed on or in connection with any railway in the United Kingdom. The NUR was born in the spring of 1913 on a tide of class struggle. On New Year's Day 1913, London taxi drivers had their first successful strike. Calls for votes for women, and for Irish Home Rule polarised Britain and Ireland, while rivalry with Germany fed an imperial arms race.
The workman cringed when the boss man thundered. 70 hours was his weekly chore. He asked for little and less was granted, lest getting little he'd ask for more.
On the 26th of August 1913, the Dublin lockout began. Over 7 months, an Irish employers' cartel, led by William Martin Murphy, a nationalist MP and owner of newspapers, trams, department stores, hotels and a shipping line, starved Irish workers into repudiating their membership of James Larkin's Irish Transport and General Workers Union. Larkin held huge torch-lit meetings in cities across England as sympathy strikes broke out in Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham. On the 18th of January 1914, Irish Transport General Workers Union leaders advised members to return to work. Jim Larkin told the Irish Congress of Trade Unions in June, "The lockout was a deliberate attempt to starve us into submission and met with well-deserved failure. The employers claim a victory, but the employers did not beat back organised labour in the city." James Connolly, however, praised trade unionists in Britain. "I say in all solemnity and seriousness that in its attitude towards Dublin, the working class movement of Great Britain reached its highest point of moral grandeur. In 1914, the Miners' Federation of Great Britain proposed a triple alliance between Tom Mann's National Transport Workers' Federation and the National Union of Railwaymen. They agreed not to settle pay claims with employers until the others had also reached agreement. The outbreak of the First World War changed everything. Under an arrangement with the railway companies, a railway executive committee took national control of railways. Between 1914 and 18, of 650,000 workers employed in the railways, 184,000 joined up, of whom over 10% lost their lives.
In the factories and mills, in the shipyards and mines, we've often been told to keep up with the times, but our skills are not needed. They've streamlined the job, and we're slide rule and stopwatch our blind day of raw day. But when the sky darkens and the prospect is war, who's given a gun and then pushed to the fore and expected to die for the land of our birth, though we've never owned one handful of earth?
Jimmy Thomas, the NUR Assistant General Secretary, met the railway executive on the 12th of February 1915 at the St Pancras Midland Hotel to negotiate the first ever National Railway Pay Award, 3 shillings a week for those earning below 30 shillings and 2 shillings for those earning more. One result of the shortage of railwaymen was a sharp increase in the numbers of women rail workers. In the summer of 1913, NUR General Secretary J.E. Williams tried to backtrack on the commitment to organise women rail workers. The NUR executive upheld his decision to refuse women NUR membership. However, when the NUR Birmingham District Council appealed against the executive's decision, the 1915 NUR Annual General Meeting in Nottingham voted by 33 votes to 23 to admit women as union members. A 19-year-old carriage cleaner, Jenny Burden, was the first woman officially admitted as an NUR member. On the 4th of March 1917, the NUR's London District Council held a meeting of the rank and file in the Albert Hall and attracted 10,000 rail workers, demanding a 10 shillings a week pay rise. The NUR was a leading industrial and political force for the working class during wartime. When school teachers, Annie and Tom Higden, were sacked in the Norfolk village of Burston in 1914, NUR branches contributed funds to build a strike school. In May 1917, hundreds of supporters travelled by NUR chartered train from Liverpool Street Station in London to present the plaque from the NUR Bermondsey branch to the school. In August 1917, 55 delegates of NUR district councils and vigilance committees voted to end the wartime industrial truce, demanding a wage rise of 20 shillings a week and to draft a post-war national programme. Workers in Britain and across the world wanted change. And in October 1917, a revolution erupted in St. Petersburg, Russia, that meant nothing could be the same again.
The armistice between Allied powers in Germany on the 11th of November 1918 ended war on the Western Front but reopened hostilities at home. Britain's political and business leaders demanded wage cuts to re-establish Britain's pre-war dominance of global trade. Lord Claude Hamilton told his Great Eastern Railway shareholders, "The time was arriving when the government must take off the velvet gloves that it had worn for too long." On the 21st of January 1919, NUR London District Council demanded paid meal breaks and an 8-hour day. London Underground refused. Strikes began on February the 3rd. By the 7th of February, meal breaks had been conceded. Mass meetings in Liverpool and Birmingham seethed with discontent. The government conceded claims by drivers and firemen on the 20th of August to buy them off. But instead, NUR called an all-out rail strike. The 9-day national rail strike resulted in a near-total shutdown of the transport system. It was the first strike to use modern mass media techniques. The NUR took out full-page advertisements in the Times and made a highly effective short newsreel film. When the government capitulated, NUR executive members summoned to meet the Prime Minister sang the Red Flag and Internationale in 10 Downing Street, at which Winston Churchill is said to have remarked, "Harmony at last, gentlemen." The NUR and ASLEF victory in opposing wage cuts in 1919 led to national agreements for the rates of pay and conditions of service by 1920 and vindicated practical solidarity and industrial trade unionism. Prime Minister Lloyd George offered union representation on the railway executive, 2 seats for NUR, 1 for ASLEF. The rail unions accepted this as a step in the right direction. NUR President Charlie Cramp told an interviewer in 1920, "We've obtained a Ministry of Transport in part the result of our demands for full workers' control. Under state ownership and under joint control, we shall retain the right to strike, and we claim it as a full right. We've not drawn up our demands in any sense of adjusting them to the ideology of capitalism. We ultimately want to destroy capitalism altogether."
The Triple Alliance failed its first big test. On the 21st of March 1921, Frank Hodges, Secretary of the Miners' Federation of Great Britain, told the NUR and National Transport Workers Federations meeting at Unity House that the miners needed whatever help they could deliver to resist wage cuts. Later the same day, the NUR executive voted against calling a general strike from midnight on the 8th of April 1921 unless the government backed down. On the 15th of April 1921, Black Friday, the miners were abandoned to fight alone against wage cuts.
The Triple Alliance was dead. The question of railway ownership remained unresolved. The 1921 Railways Act reorganised Britain's railways into the Big Four, private regional monopolies, but granted NUR, ASLEF and RCA statutory recognition and legal status for union reps and committees.
Since the December 1923 general election, When Jimmy Thomas became Colonial Secretary in the first Labour government, he began openly opposing strike action by trade unions, particularly his own. In June 1925, coal owners again tried to slash miners' wages.
This time, the rail unions with the newly formed Transport and General Workers Union moved immediately to ban transport of coal from July. On the 30th of July, the government blinked and agreed a temporary subsidy to prevent wage cuts.
Red Friday, as the Daily Herald newspaper called it, showed Labour's strength in unity.
9 months later, the Tory government was ready for a showdown, and the coal owners gave notice for pay cuts of up to 40%. From midnight on Monday, the 3rd of May 1926, a general strike began, lasting 11 days. More rail workers took action in solidarity with the miners between the 4th and the 14th of May, even then during their own fight against wage cuts in 1919. Stratford's Labour Bulletin headlined, "Out to a Woman," reported on the 11th of May, all carriage cleaners at Wimbledon Park Depot were on strike. Given how few mines there were in southwest London, this was impressive solidarity indeed.
But NUR General Secretary Jimmy Thomas told a public meeting in Hammersmith on the 9th of May, "I have never disguised that I do not like the principle of a general strike." Thomas used his establishment contacts to broker a fake compromise offer from Sir Herbert Samuels, chair of the Royal Commission on the mining industry. And TUC leaders used it as an excuse to call off the strike action and once again leave the miners locked out and isolated.
On the 23rd of August 1931, the Labour cabinet split over a proposal to cut unemployment benefit by 10%. Jimmy Thomas, who voted for the cut, followed Labour leader Ramsay MacDonald to form a national government with the support of the Conservative and Liberal parties.
I ask you, therefore, at this election, to return a body of men of all parties, united in serving the national interest, and give them power.
The NUR executive instructed NUR's 7 MPs to oppose the national government. Thomas resigned as Union General Secretary on the spot.
Jim Campbell, who became NUR General Secretary in 1953, said that whatever good J.H. Thomas ever did for rail workers was cancelled out by handing over the working classes to a reactionary government.
The setbacks of the 1920s led rail workers to build vigilance committees, workplace organisations dedicated to upholding the national agreements won in 1920.
In January, you've still got the choice. You can cut the weeds before they start to bud. If you leave them to grow high, they'll silence your voice, and in December, you may pay with your blood. So close your eyes, stop your ears, close your mouth and take it slow. Let others take the lead and you bring up the rear, and later you can say you didn't know.
The crisis of the world's greatest capitalist economies in 1930s fed fascism in Italy, Germany, Hungary, Austria and Spain. Delegates to NUR conferences campaigned for a united front between trade unionists, the Labour and Communist parties to fight fascism. The names of 53 members of the National Union of Seamen and National Union of Railwaymen who volunteered to fight fascism in Spain with the international brigades are recorded on the plaque in Unity House. At the outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939, railways became the front line as children were evacuated by rail from British cities.
100,000 railwaymen joined the armed forces to fight fascism, but those who remained in railway service faced bombing raids every night during October 1940. Labour's general election victory in 1945 led to the 1947 Transport Act to establish public ownership of railways, docks, canals and road haulage under a British Transport Commission.
We had really no say and no input, really, as a lot of us interpreted nationalisation. It was, as I've said, state capital run, and it was run on capitalist dogma, on capitalist criteria. And in fact, it didn't do a great deal for railway workers who historically were very low paid, worked in the shift industry, arduous and hard. So it didn't do a great deal for the workers in the railway. And to me, nationalisation should have encompassed that. It should have taken that into account. The NUR sort of accepted that a bit too much. That you know, we fought hard for the Attlee nationalisation, and therefore that was, although it was a major step, I think we you know, the leadership sat on its laurels and felt that now we have an Attlee government, now we have a Labour government with a massive majority, that they can get on with it. After all, we founded the Labour Party, and that's their job to do it now. And of course, life didn't work out like that. And sadly, unfortunately, if workers are not on their toes, it doesn't work out like that. And hence, again, the importance of trade unions and democracy.
Although NUR members criticised the weak workers' representation on the management boards and the generous compensation paid to the pre-war shareholders, which pulled down wages, railway nationalisation under central planning was in large part the NUR's achievement. NUR General Secretary John Marchbank helped to draft the Labour Party pamphlet Post-War Organisation of British Transport, which advocated a national transport authority to own and control transport services.
It well recalls the triumphs past. It gives the hope of peace at last. The banner bright, the symbol plain of human right and human gain. Then raise the scarlet standard high. Beneath its fold we'll live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here.
Trade unionism in Britain's merchant navy is intertwined with the history of Britain's empire and of other transport workers. The National Sailors and Firemen's Union in 1911 successfully challenged the anti-union ban by Employers Shipping Federation and won trade union recognition using national strike action.
However, NSFU General Secretary James Havelock Wilson turned into a fervent war supporter in 1914, organising patriotic mobs to attack strikers' picket lines during the First World War, and volunteering to run an internment camp in Northamptonshire for union members of German nationality who were classed as enemy aliens.
After the war, when hundreds of African, Indian and Chinese seafarers were dumped by shipping companies in British ports with no means of subsistence, Havelock Wilson's main henchman, Captain Tupper, was sent to Cardiff and Liverpool to organise race riots against these foreign seafarers.
The degeneration of the militant Seafarers Union came about as a result of a partnership with the Shipping Federation, in which the union weeded out troublemakers, including strikers, socialists and communists, in return for sole union recognition by shipping employers.
This company unionism was no good for seafarers who protested against their own union leaders in 1925 when Wilson agreed to a pay cut that the miners successfully resisted on Red Friday. In 1926, the National Union of Seamen was the only TUC affiliate refusing to back the miners in the general strike and was briefly expelled from the TUC for backing a breakaway scab miners' union in Nottinghamshire. In 1947, when British seafarers undertook wildcat strike action in a national walkout alongside members of the militant Canadian Seamen's Union, 3 leading NUS members were jailed under the 1894 Merchant Shipping Act, which allowed seafarers going on the strike to be imprisoned for desertion or disobeying a lawful command.
The Merchant Shipping Act made union representation at sea a criminal offence. In 1955, striking seafarers started electing shipboard reps and demanding the right to be recognised for collective bargaining.
No officials were elected. The only elections that took place in the Seamen's Union for the General Secretary. All appointments, so got them by the balls, haven't they? You know, you're out of a job if you don't toe the line.
As far as the ordinary rank and file members are concerned, they had no input whatsoever into the organisation. In fact, they were frightened of the organisation.
The Seamen's Union was a leg iron on any progress, because they wouldn't do anything unless it was agreed. There would never be a struggle with the ship owners. It all had to be done like brown paper envelopes and hands under the table, like that sort of approach.
In July 1960, when a ship's steward was dismissed in Liverpool, NUS activist Joe Kenny led a wildcat strike by 345 men on Cunard's Sylvania liner. He was jailed under the Merchant Shipping Act, but the strike gave union activists such as Jim Slater from South Shields and Gordon Norris from London the impetus to establish a national seamen's reform movement to demand better shipboard discipline, higher pay, a shorter working week, and the rights to elect shipboard union reps.
In 1961, a 44-hour week came in for seafarers, but NUS members wanted a 40-hour week, which was standard for workers ashore. Then in 1965, the NUS negotiated a consolidated 56-hour week, National Maritime Board Agreement, which rolled up 16 hours weekend overtime into basic pay. This was the breaking point. Members of the National Seamen's Reform Movement were elected to the NUS executive in 1965, demanding a cut in the working week from 56 to 40 hours.
Labour ministers were convinced that communists in the trade unions were determined to break the government's incomes policy of holding down wage increases.
On the 16th of May 1966, the first national seafarer strike since 1911 began.
Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. At midnight last night, British seamen began to write a page in the history of the British trade union movement. A history which will long be remembered in the British labour movement. British seamen have said, and indeed say now, we want our self-respect. We demand our self-respect. British seamen will fight for and will get this self-respect, which is to achieve what other workers in Britain and other workers in the shipping industry, what you, our brother dockers, have at this moment: a 40-hour week at sea, a basic wage of £60 a month, which works out to 7 and a tenner an hour. Is this unreasonable? Is it?
Prime Minister Harold Wilson's Labour government declared a state of emergency. By the 31st of May, 651 ships lay idle and almost 19,000 seafarers were on strike.
Now, you're both members of the National Union of Seamen. What are you doing here today?
Well, we're going out and strike.
Now, you're wearing an NUS picket armband. It's very strange to see a woman wearing one. How did it come about?
Well, I went to the National Union of Seamen's office this morning to sign on, and they asked me if I would do 2 hours picket every day.
Why were you here in the first place?
Well, to back the boys up, the seamen.
But you are a member of the National Union of
Yes,
Seamen, and you were going to sign on here, weren't you?
We were due to sign on today on the Rangatani.
Going where?
To New Zealand. And owing to the strike that came off at midnight last night, we've decided not to sign on.
£38 million were wiped off the Bank of England gold and US dollar reserves in May 1966 as the government propped up the pound.
On the 7th of June 1966, the NUS appealed to the International Transport Workers' Federation to embargo all British flagged vessels around the world, while asking the TUC to boycott all foreign ships in British ports. Over 800 ships were affected and over 23,000 seafarers on strike. The TUC refused to support the strike, calling on the NUS to support government proposals to end the dispute. 4 days later, 3,000 dockers in Hull stopped work, boycotting cargo movements. Dockers in Liverpool and London also refused to handle boycotted cargo.
On the 20th of June 1966, Prime Minister Harold Wilson went into full Red Scare mode in a speech to the House of Commons, denouncing a tightly knit group of politically motivated men he said were putting pressure on the realistic and reasonable members of the NUS executive.
This is the sort of utterances that were made by the Tories against the Labour Party, the red herrings they were thrown across, the communist leadership in the Labour Party. This was the stuff that was used by the Tories a few years ago. And we see this stupid little man Wilson used them against us, the seamen of this country and the workers of this country.
A week later, in the House of Commons, Harold Wilson named NUS strike leaders Gordon Norris, Jack Coward and Roger Woods as communists who he said were going round ports with Communist Dockers leaders Jack Dash and Harry Watson and Communist Party industrial organiser Bert Ramilton to keep a firm grip on the movement. This information came directly from Secret Intelligence Service briefings on lawful strike action. It was the government and the security services that were outside the law. Harold Wilson's real concern was that seafarers' militancy would inspire other workers to challenge his government's incomes policy.
The NUS executive voted 29-16 to accept ship owners' new offer of a 40-hour week with 9 extra days annual leave, accompanied by modest pay increases. The National Seamen's Reform Movement had overturned 55 years of NUS company unionism.
We've got the pay problem regarding pay, wages, that normalised, well, still wasn't any good even when they normalised it, but it was an achievement. Delegates on ships and the Merchant Shipping Act dischargeable. They were the, if I was to be pinpointed, they were the 3 advances that we made. And of course, I suppose if we were to look for the most significant advance, was it threw up leaders.
Jim Slater, the blacklisted NUS leader from South Shields, was elected NUS General Secretary in 1974 and President in 1986. The same year, the union took national strike action against the giant P&O shipping company owned by Margaret Thatcher's favourite businessman, Geoffrey Sterling.
Thatcher's Tory government first used the new anti-trade union laws introduced in 1985 to defeat the National Union of Mine Workers in order to sequestrate the buildings, bank accounts and assets of the NUS in 1987 for organising unlawful strike action.
The National Union of Seamen have been fined £150,000 for contempt of court. The High Court has also ruled that all the union's assets should be seized.
The union was sequestrated in London, that they couldn't apply that law to Scotland. So we went about our business. We ended up, myself, Stevie Todd and a few other people commandeered the office and locked the bailiffs out. And we had some fun for a few weeks.
They had to go to the court in Edinburgh, the High Court in Edinburgh, to reserve the sequestration order and get it passed in Scotland. But by then we'd moved all the finances.
Our union, RMT, was formed 3 years later, in September 1990, by a merger between the NUS and NUR, two great industrial unions. In 2008, we were joined by the Offshore Industry Liaison Committee, organising workers in the offshore oil and gas industry.
Today, RMT maintains the best traditions of militant industrial unionism, both in action by our members and by campaigning for the scrapping of all anti-union laws and for a positive framework of employment and trade union rights by the next Labour government.
Today, RMT's first objective remains to secure the complete organisation of all workers employed by any board, company or authority in connection with rail, sea and other transport and auxiliary undertakings and offshore energy. Our union's motto remains, unity is strength, because together we are more than the sum of our parts.
My job as a General Secretary is to ensure that you've got every tool at your disposal to promote the work of the union, to achieve credible gains for the benefit of our members. This film is one element of doing that. It's about explaining how we've got where we are today. And what we hope you will do with this is then take it to the next step and go and learn more, go and see how we can achieve more and how we can continue the strong tradition of the RMT as a fighting, democratic, worker-led union.